The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, let's start our podcast with a Leafs Corner. And obviously, you know, this is a team you follow all the time. And we did talk about a trade with them last week with Timothy Liljegren being shipped off to San Jose. But when you look at their salary cap structure, as you would know a lot more in depth than I would, it seems as if they still might need to move out a body or so, especially with some guys still on LTIR that need to come back. What do you make of that structure, and what could that move look like?
Well, it's probably coming soon, and I would say that at this point, it's probably two bodies, depending on the health of the roster at any given moment here in the next week that they're going to have to look at, because they have Yanni Hakanpää and Connor Dewar both went down to the American Hockey League over the weekend on what are called LTIR conditioning loans. Mm-hmm. And what those mean is they're actually only can last 6 days. And it's basically done when players are coming off a long-term injury to test whether they're ready to be activated, essentially, to put them in a game situation and see if they're ready. And, you know, occasionally you do see those loans extended. So there's a possibility here the Leafs extend the loans for one or both of those players. But what it does tell us is that both Hakanpää and Dewar are very close to being ready to play again for the Leafs. And in Hakanpää's case, it would be his first game for Leafs because he signed with them over the summer. Right. But, you know, right now they actually do have some cap room because of the Liljegren trade. What they don't have is roster space. They're at the maximum of 23 players. And so to bring one or both of Hakanpää and Dewar onto the roster, that would mean someone else has to go out. And you know, I think that it's possible they do that with waivers. But I do think another trade is also, you know, potentially in the offing here. And, you know, I would look first at a player like Matt Benning, who was brought in as a veteran in the Timothy Liljegren deal. You know, he was included from the San Jose end of that trade, you know, to help offset the cost of the players. And, you know, he just might not have much of a path right now to a job with the Leafs. And I think that the Leafs will look to, you know, make sure that he's taken care of. And so I think, you know, he's a possible trade target. But, you know, you even look at the lineup in recent games. They've, you know, Pontus Holmberg is sat out of games. You've had Nick Robertson out lately. You know, Philippe Myers, if there's someone that's going to go through waivers, I think is a possibility there. And so, you know, we're at this weird moment where the Leafs definitely, they have an abundance of NHL players. They have too many NHL players. And I only say too many because you can't play them all in any given night. And obviously with the rules in place in the CBA, you can't have them all on your roster just stashed away, waited for a rainy day. And so, you know, I would say as we start this new week, you know, that there's a bit of a crunch coming, with the caveat that, you know, occasionally those LTIR conditioning loans get extended. The Marlies, in this case, don't play again until next Saturday. Maybe they extend it another week and Hakanpää and Dewar continue to skate in the AHL and play another game down there. But one way or another, the Leafs have to create roster space, and they're in a bit of a logjam. And you know, I'd say Benning's a possibility, but, you know, who knows beyond that if they're looking at some of the veterans, you know, on the roster. Keep in mind they have Kelly Yarncroke as well, who's still not as close to returning to the NHL roster, but he's another NHL player that's in the mix for them. So it might be one of the forwards that they end up, you know, having to move out, at least one of the forwards. And so, you know, whether it's a David Kampf or, you know, Holmberg, one of these guys. I mean, I think the Leafs are finally, put it this way, the rent is finally coming due on some of the decisions they've had to delay from the start of the season just because they're getting a little healthier, which is good news in the big picture. But, you know, for Brandon Pridham, they're cap wizard, and for Brad Treliving, there's some work to be done here in the next few days.
Interesting. So it feels as if, at least to start off this week for the Toronto Maple Leafs, be on the lookout for some kind of move, says CJ. What did you think of their game on Sunday night against the Minnesota Wild? It looks like they scored a goal finally on the power play, but losers against the Wild.
Yeah, tough loss in a sense in overtime, but I think actually it's a game they can hang their hat on. You know, it was played 24 hours from their previous game in St. Louis, which was a loss. You know, I thought the Leafs, you know, fought pretty hard in the game, as you mentioned. I mean, the power play is the biggest issue from 10,000 feet. I mean, on any given day, the way the Leafs are dissected and discussed, we could go all sorts of different ways. But I mean, the fact that they've been so poor, last overall in the league in terms of efficiency on the power play, I mean, that can't continue. And so to get a goal, you know, in that game state, it was William Nylander that scored from from Matthews. They actually rolled out 5 forwards. I mean, they've really been jumbling up what they're doing. So I can't say that this 5 forward look is going to last, but, I think it's a sign of desperate times, calling for desperate measures, that they went with 5 forwards on PP1 and managed to get a goal that at least got them a point in the game. So, I thought that the Leafs showed a lot of pushback, on what was sort of looked like a schedule loss. I think every team will look at their schedule and reasonably see X number of games where, they're against a rested opponent at that opponent's home, or they've played the night before, or the travel, blah, 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 blah. It's not to make excuses, but I think at least if you get a point out of that game, which the Leafs did, they'll be feeling pretty good about it. But they got no time to relax. I mean, it's already a big week. They come home now, they play Tuesday against Boston, and then it's the Hall of Fame weekend this coming weekend, where they play Friday, Saturday against Detroit and Montreal. So, that's a big stretch of home games, from where the Leafs have been. Obviously a bit of an up and down start to the season. Scoring on the power play helps for them. Stolar has played really well in net. Nothing he can do on the Matt Boldy overtime winner. The guy had a clear breakaway, and it had a really nice finish for Minnesota. But, I do think that there's a tone of positivity into that loss for the Leafs, just given the circumstances around the game.
So why is this power play not working for them? I asked this as someone obviously who's seen a Mark Savard power play, not really work, but just why is it not working? Considering the personnel that's there, it should work.
Yeah, it should work because it's worked for years too. I mean, it's failed them at crucial times. So that's where some of, I think, the skepticism comes from in the market. But if you actually look at the Leafs power play ranking season by season for the last number of seasons, I mean, it's consistently been top 10 at its best a couple years ago when Spencer Carberry was running the power play before he went to Washington to be the head coach. I think they finished second one of those seasons in terms of efficiency. It bailed on them in the playoffs last year, and it's done in some other prior series. But with the same essential grouping of the top 5 players, they've scored a lot of goals. And I think the fact that this struggles really can be traced to last February is what's concerning now. They seem a little static, but there's no, I don't think there's an easy explanation. And clearly when it doesn't go well, I think confidence is a big part, as for any sort of offensive player, any very, talented, gifted player. When you're feeling good, I think you're just flowing and everything's going great. The Leafs have not been flowing, suffice to say, given this start. And so, I still think it's certainly deep enough into the season where it's a very worthy talking point, where they deserve criticism and questions about it. But I do think, given the number of years that these players collectively have had success, it's too soon to say that it's going to be a disaster all season long. Like, I think there's obviously a solution for them to be found. But, I think the challenge is, quite honestly, is they have to find a new answer to what's kind of a familiar, challenge. I think just doing what they've done, you become stale, you become predictable. Obviously, teams, the penalty kills heavily scout the tendencies of every team they're going to play. And the Leafs, have to find some new answers, and that's on Mark Savard. But, what isn't on him entirely is the failings here, because, it was headed in the wrong direction for the last, 6 weeks of last regular season. And then in the first round against Boston might have cost them the series.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Boston. Boston playing on Sunday night. They beat the Seattle Kraken, but the big headline from the game, David Pastrnak benched for much of the third period. What did you make of that storyline popping up out of Boston?
Well, what it tells us is how urgent the situation is, because, you step back and you're like, wow, I mean, Boston certainly had a very difficult week last week. They were on the wrong side of a couple lopsided losses, but then they get to the weekend and they win on back-to-back days. They don't allow a goal against in those wins over Philadelphia and Seattle. And you would think that it should be a more positive vibe, that, hey, we've turned the corner here. We've, eked out some victories. We're playing a little tighter, more contained. And yet the star player doesn't play at all in the third period. And obviously Jim Montgomery has used this in the past, as recently as last year's playoffs, called out David Pastrnak by name in that series against Toronto. Pastrnak, the next game, Game 7, scores the overtime and series clinching goal. So in that case, it worked. Obviously we've seen him in a game recently, really go at Brad Marchand, the team's captain, for a mistake he'd made on a goal against. And Marchand later defended that in the media. But, this speaks to the urgency in Boston. I mean, this is not a case where they can sit around and wait till U.S. Thanksgiving and be like, okay, let's see where we're at. I mean, pretty clearly you're seeing a coach here in Jim Montgomery who's known to be in the last year of his contract. To be coaching like every day could be his last. I'm not saying that every day is necessarily going to be his last, but the actions here line up with him knowing that he's got to get this thing turned around like now, stat. Like there can be no, let's just see how this looks in a week for him, because he can't count on that week still being there. So that's how I view it. I do think with a veteran team the way the Bruins are, I think with kind of the tone you get at the top of the roster, the way even Marchand talked about publicly about when the coach went at him, Marchand said we'd have bigger problems if he didn't do that. So I think it's a team that can handle this kind of thing, but it's certainly, I mean, it's not going to go without notice when your star player doesn't play for the entire third period of a game you end up winning. Yeah. And, not that this would all be in Jim Montgomery's mind at the time, but now they're going into a big game Tuesday. Obviously whenever Leafs and Bruins play, it's a rivalry game. There's going to be a few extra eyes and spotlight on that type of game. And that will be one of the storylines going into that game. It's just why that happened, how Pastrnak responds, what it means. What it tells me, Julian, they got to get winning in Boston right now. I mean, they started on the weekend with two victories back to back. But they are still not in a great position at this stage of the season, and they're not sitting around just assuming it's going to get better on its own in the next few weeks.
And hey, not the first time Jim Montgomery's wanted more out of his star player too.
No, and look, I don't see a problem with it. I mean, it'll be interesting to learn a little bit more about what went on. I mean, Montgomery called it a coach's decision. Mm-hmm. Pastrnak, I think, had 7 shots through 2 periods, and it wasn't.
I think he led all Bruins in shots on goal, and I know I kind of couched it saying much of the third. Yeah, he did not play a shift at all. I think he stepped on the ice for a TV timeout, and that was it. Right,
and so I wasn't watching the game myself, so I don't know if there was something. There's nothing obvious that led to it, I guess, is what I'll say. Yeah. And nothing on the stat sheet makes you say, it wasn't like he was a minus player in the game, obviously, because he didn't allow a goal against. So, just be curious to know a little bit more about the dynamic there and how they handle that. But I'm with you. I think it's a team, frankly, there's a lot of adults in that room. It's an older team. It's a team that's been through things. I'm not at all proclaiming them a cup favorite, but it's an environment where it's sort of every year the cup is 100% the mission, and there's not a but to whatever else will happen. And, Montgomery, as I say, he's coaching on a knife's edge a little bit. And so, this is, you can only do it so much. I will say that. I mean, typically, you can only push those are among the more extreme, ice time is the real thing a coach can control. Obviously there's other things systematically, I think, but like the ice time is a very, it's an arbitrary decision by the coach, and you can send messages with it. And so I just think you can only go to this well so often. But nothing tells me it's too soon or too much just yet, but let's see how these next games go, because, if Montgomery is already doing these things this early in the year, I do think it does tell us something about the situation there. It's not comfortable. It's not, oh, this will work itself out. I mean, the Bruins, obviously they've had such a team culture and been so successful for so long, but they went out and spent, pretty big money to get, Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov as free agents in the offseason. They traded away Allmark and they're trying to figure it out with what they have. And, I think a lot of people sit back every year and are waiting for the Bruins to finally take a major step back. I'm certainly not offering a prediction on that just yet, but they're fighting against Father Time. They're fighting against, every team. It's hard to stay at or near the top for a long period of time. And, I see a coach that's not going to go down without a bit of a fight, if you know what I'm saying. He's going to, he's going to really push the players beyond their comfort zone and do what he can to try to make sure it's not going to happen right now and right here.
For sure. At least for the Bruins, they're still in that pack in the Atlantic. I don't know how often you look at the standings in the Atlantic, but just beyond Tampa, I guess, being 5 points clear of everyone, like there is a big log jam of teams, even the guys at the bottom in Buffalo and Montreal, who maybe not off to the best starts that they would want, but still not completely out of it. One decent stretch of games could put them back in, but also for Buffalo, Montreal, it looks a lot more dire. It's a little bit more optimistic if you're a Boston, even if you're a Detroit or an Ottawa. But yeah, for the Bruins, at the very least, they're still in that middle of the pack to start.
Do you know what's funny? I don't know if it's bad to admit this. I haven't looked at the standings this year. So,
interesting.
Obviously I have a sense, like I'm guessing Carolina is right up there. Obviously Winnipeg with just the one loss so far. I know the Jets are 11-1 after winning in Tampa on Sunday. So I can guess who's at sort of the very top, but it's just a little too soon. And I don't know, maybe I've been busy doing other things, but yeah, that's
very fair.
I haven't lived there just yet. But we're getting to that time. I mean, certainly, I think that the stats sort of speak for themselves. If it gets to sort of the U.S. Thanksgiving period, like, call it 2 to 3 weeks from now, if you're not in a playoff spot, very few teams get into one by the time where you want to be. I mean, it does happen, but it's not impossible. But, it's hard to make up points in a league where there's a lot of 3-point games. It's just the fact of the matter. So, anyway, I don't know if I should be looking at the standings, but I haven't looked at the standings yet this year.
Part of me doesn't want you to look at the standings if we do contenders and pretenders again this year at American Thanksgiving. Part of me wants me to just see you surprised.
See, I might have to look by then.
Still though, it would be very fun. Your brain knows a lot of stuff, so I'm sure
we're
you would have
sitting here
found
on
a way to make it
November
work
4th,
anyway.
and I have not looked at the standings. That's
pretty impressive.
I guess. I don't know. I just hasn't even occurred to me yet. Like, the other thing I haven't looked at is the scoring leaders yet either. I mean,
really?
I guess I haven't looked at it in the frame of reference, like who's number one. I've just been doing my picks for the Four Nations tournament for the Athletic. So I have been looking through like who's having a good start to the season, Canadians, Americans, Finns, Swedes, because I'm picking out the 4 rosters. But I haven't like focused on, like, I'm sure Kyle Connor's got to be up there. Kaprizov, I know, has had a great start. I mean, I can guess the sort of, but I don't actually know who's leading the league in scoring either just yet.
You know what's funny? Before our rundown for today's show ended up being what it was, like in the chat, like I had said, like, hey, I don't know what we're going to do. And then we ended up coming up with some topics. But I did toy with the idea of going through some of the scoring leaders and asking which of those players are you most surprised of with their starts. And now that you mentioned making your picks for Four Nations, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Is Sam Reinhart on your Four Nations team for Team Canada?
Yeah, 100%. I would be surprised if there's even debate about that. Mm-hmm. But it's a tough spot. I mean, essentially every team, each of the teams has what I would say is like one area where it's really hard without knowing exactly what the management is thinking and saying to guess. And for Team Canada, one of the areas I think it's very difficult is what they do with their right winger situation. Because I imagine given the number of centers Canada always has, I mean, Canada, when you see best on best, they always, switch centers to the wing. In my mind, one of Nathan McKinnon or Braden Point, who are both already named to the team, are probably going to play right wing. So that's going to be one of your right wing spots. Not both. I don't know which one. It sounds like McKinnon's willing to do it. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being Point. He's played a lot of wing in his time in Tampa, or he's gone back and forth. So then you have him. You have Mitch Marner. You have Reinhart. Mm-hmm. You have Mark Stone, who I think I really think all 4 of those guys are probably on the team. And then beyond that, there's a bunch of players like Connor Bedard would be a right winger, most likely in this situation. Like Matt Barzal, who I haven't mentioned. I know he's out with a significant injury right now, but probably a tough path for him to make it. Like I just think it's the toughest spot sort of to guess. Cause you can imagine a world and I'm certainly not saying Bedard won't be on the team. I don't think he's going to be on the team. I haven't totally finalized what I'm doing, but right now I don't think he's in my 13 forwards. Just because again, you have to, it's not just saying like who shouldn't be there. Like you have to look at like a lineup and imagine how they'd want to use it, what they're trying to get out of each position. Anyway, it's a long way of saying to me, there was no debate about having Sam Reinhart as one of the right wingers. And that's while acknowledging that it's a spot that Canada has a lot of really good choices. Like where I think, even guys like Stamkos or like, I just think that there's going to be very good players left out of the team that specifically can play that part. I'm still debating if while we're on the topic of the Panthers, I think Sam Bennett's going to be in there too for me as like maybe a fourth line left winger. But I'm still jumbling around. Man, talk about putting yourself into a mental pretzel. The U.S. Defense Corps is the same thing as what I'm saying. Because they already have, Quinn Hughes named to the team, Adam Fox, and Charlie McAvoy. So 3 of the spots are spoken for. But then, so you only have, I think Jacob Slavin will be among the players. So I've got him, like I kind of have them as the top 4. But then among the players that you have only for the last 3 spots, you have, Keandre Miller, you have Zach Werenski, you have Sanderson. I think Brock Faber is probably going to be there.
Yeah, I think he will.
And don't overlook John Carlson. From what I've heard, they're very high on Carlson. The Capitals have been one of the great stories of the season. I think he's had a great start individually to the year. And so don't be surprised if they end up taking a veteran player, maybe at the expense of someone like Sanderson. Not because Sanderson's doing anything wrong. It's just, it's a numbers game, and it might be, when they're looking at the 7th D, for example, maybe it ends up they want to go with a bit of experience there. Anyway, these are tough choices. I'm glad I'm not paid to make them in the way. I mean, I don't think any of the GMs are really paid. It's the volunteer positions, but there's a lot of scrutiny that comes with the picks. And really, of course, as we know, the Olympic picks are what really matter. The stakes are much higher there, but you're making these Four Nations decisions too with the Olympics in mind. And so anyway, I've spent a big chunk of my weekend. I've almost got my 4 roster set, but I haven't sent them in yet. And there's still some room for me to play with, especially at the depth. Like, most teams, the first 15 names aren't that hard. But certainly when you're doing the next grouping, there's going to be decisions to be made.
Oh, we're definitely going to analyze your picks for these Four Nations teams when it comes time to siege.
Yeah. Tell me all the dumb decisions I made. I mean,
it doesn't sound like you've made any dumb real decisions. Like, I hear a lot of the Ottawa folk in my ear at the possibility of Jake Sanderson being left off, but like, I don't know if you've necessarily, I haven't heard any weird, really off-putting decisions as of yet. You haven't given us the full scope, but like, I don't see any real bad picks.
Well, the thing is, you can't really make a bad pick. You might make a wrong pick, but
sure.
Either way, you're putting forward a team of a lot of good players. Even the Canadian D I'm still wrestling with. Like, right now, I think I have McKenzie Weegar as my 7th D.
Ooh, Weegar's on your team. I know for some people he'd be like a first cut.
Yeah, I got him right now on the team, but then I'm pretty sure, again, because I've been wrestling with it and I don't have it in front of me, I think I had Noah Dobson not making it. Because I basically, I think essentially,
like Dobson, you should be there, I think.
Yeah, but this is the thing. You have to make a decision. Like, I'm pretty sure they're going to keep together the 2 pairings that are built in, right? That you're going to have Theodore Pietrangelo and Taves and Makar.
Yeah.
And then so really you're talking about 3 spots beyond those players, and you're talking about only 1 guaranteed left shot D spot, because they might take a righty with the 7th D spot, right? And so, I have Morrissey in my 3rd pair left D spot. And then I'm just saying Dobson gets squeezed out in that world. Man, it's tough. Again, I haven't filed this, so I don't want to go too deep down, because maybe by the time the list comes out, I actually put Dobson back in. But that's what I'm wrestling with. And so Weegar, as of the last version that I was playing with, was my 7th D, just because I think he brings a different element that they don't have.
Good two-way defenseman, has some offensive capability, can defend, absolutely physical. Yeah, I get it. But,
I mean, at the end of the day, though, if you're picking, like, does Evan Bouchard make the team? Like, it's not going to be, I know they're looking at Morgan Riley too, but he's probably like 9th for me, meaning like not even the last cut at this point. I've seen some people
picking for every team.
Yeah, I'm doing all 4. I mean,
okay.
The cool thing in a weird way about a 4-team tournament is you can plausibly do it. In Finland, I can tell you the exercise is not as hard, because they only have 8 defensemen that have played in the league this year, and every player has to be an NHL player. So at this point, you only have to quote unquote cut 1 Finnish defenseman that's played in the league. And in fact, the only thing I'm wrestling with there is I actually think Hakanpää has a chance to play for Finland because he does some things that they don't have necessarily elsewhere, but he hasn't even played a game yet in the league this year. And so literally my decision is, do I put Hakanpää as the 7th D, or do I go with like Juuso Välimäki, for example, who's probably going to get cut but some with the Finnish team, there's so many fewer NHL players. So from that country, so it doesn't take as long. And I think the goaltending is pretty straightforward for most of the teams. Like I don't know who the third Swedish goalie will be. I don't know if I could go at like the third Finnish goalie is what I'm wrestling with. Luukkonen or Justus Annunen. But I think
Kevin Lankinen there.
Yeah, him and Saros at the top. I think with the U.S., they're just going to go with the big guys. I mean, I'd be surprised if it isn't Hellebuck, Swayman, and Ottinger as a 3. Canada, I think 2 of the 3 will be Binnington and Hill. And then there's a bit of do you go Stuart Skinner? Do you go Talbot in the 3rd spot? I know there's been some love for Marc-Andre Fleury in that spot.
I was going to ask, is Marc-Andre Fleury, he hasn't played that many games this year. Are you somehow leaning on his experience for this tournament, just looking at what the situation is for Team Canada?
I mean, I love the storyline. I loved everything we saw in Pittsburgh last week. We didn't even really touch it on the pod, but where he went back and,
great story.
Like Marc-Andre Fleury is deserving all the positive attention he gets. I just think at this stage of his career, I don't think Canada can afford to do anything for like even anything vaguely resembling sentimental reasons or anything. You know what I mean? Like, I think you have, because especially Canada, like most teams, your third goalie, you're going there. That person's only playing if there's a disaster, if there's injury or something. Canada's third goalie, now it's a really short tournament, so maybe there's not, but it's like, it's in play that person has to play because it's just not clear what the best thing to do is. So anyway, right now I think I'm going to go with Talbot because his form has been the best. But I got time for Skinner or, Montembeault is getting some love out there too. But right now I'm going with Hill, Binnington, and Talbot for the Canadian goalies.
This is did you say Talbot?
I mean, look, I'm not arguing this is we've identified for 2 years or 3 years that this is going to be, a Canadian. It's not a strength on paper. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But Talbot is the only goalie among the Canadian goalies, I think, with a 900 plus save percentage.
Yep.
Saw Josh Clifford tweeted that out.
That's true. You're right. He did bring up that stat. Ooh.
And I just feel like you're going to go with form, but if it ends up being like Stuart Skinner, I'm not going to be like, that's a terrible pick. It's just Edmonton's season hasn't started off great. He's still got a month too. I mean, a little less than a month till the picks have to be in December 2nd. So, this is reflecting where we're at today. And I'm sure I'm going to have to do this exercise again before December 2nd if I'm guessing.
I would like to think that this segment has proven to be a good dress rehearsal for when you finalize those picks and you analyze each and every one of them on the podcast.
Well, if nothing else, you can see that I didn't just like throw some names down on paper like a dog ape. I brought dog ape my homework energy, as I mentioned in my Halloween costume the other day. This is not a dog. Like, you might not agree with my picks, but I have very much thought them through. I've been bouncing them off people that have an idea about how the teams are thinking. Like, I'm trying to have it be as close to what it, as close to accurate as I can be. That being said, Bill Guerin or Don Sweeney or, Yuri Lettinen, like they're not calling me up and telling me exactly what they're thinking. So, I mean, I'm not portraying this as what they're going to do. It's just the best guesstimate of what I think they're going to do based on what I know today.
Okay. So we'll get back to the Four Nations squad building at some point, because I thought that was really interesting. Really great insight.
Yeah, we didn't even plan that. That was freelance.
That was
right
just
there.
Awesome. That was really good. This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Mint Mobile. When you discover a new binge-worthy show or song that you bump on repeat and you have to share it with all of your friends so they can experience just how awesome it is? That's kind of what it feels like when you discover that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. It's such an awesome deal. There's no way you can keep it to yourself. I mean, literally, CJ is part of this ad.
$15 a month? 15?
Yeah, I'm telling you. Seriously.
Well, friends don't let friends overpay for mobile, Julian. So say goodbye to your wireless plan and sign up for Mint Mobile.
Mint Mobile is here to rescue you and your squad with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. And to get this new customer offer, I'm telling you, and to get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/Johnston. That's CJ's last name. Mintmobile.com/Johnston to cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Johnston.
15.
$45 upfront, payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. I want to talk really quickly. Alexander Ovechkin. He's starting to pick up with the goal scoring. Goals in his last 4 straight games, 7 in his last 11. Shayna Goldman was tweeting about Ovechkin on Sunday night, on pace for a 52 goal season. He looks like he could break the record this season for most goals all time. Just when it seemed as if he started off the year cold. He's doing it again, like what he did last year, where he's cold and then all of a sudden he picks up. What do you make of Alexander Ovechkin's pace to start the season?
Well, he's put a shock of intrigue into all this, right? I mean, to have a chance to break the record come March or early April, he needed to have a pretty good start to the year. Now we've got through the first stretch of schedule and he's had that start, right? Like you could do the on pace to break the record on March 22nd or whatever. I've seen a few dates floating around, but the point is right now he is on pace to get the number of goals he would need to pass Wayne Gretzky for the all-time record. And, the Capitals really have been one of the great stories, I'd say, to start the year. If you are 100% out there, you probably have noticed that I was one of the few that I was actually quite favorable in their off season. Like I thought that they made some interesting moves. I really think highly of Spencer Carberry, their head coach, who I think got a lot out of that team last year and helped them reach the playoffs. And they're doing what Pittsburgh wants to do. And, Pittsburgh's, strung together a couple wins here. Sidney Crosby's getting close to 600 goal mark when we're talking about goals. So, maybe it's too soon to bury the Penguins. But the Capitals are successfully doing what Pittsburgh's trying to do, is staying relevant while having, this franchise legend on their team still. And I think it actually is a positive thing for Ovechkin's goal chase that they're off to this start, that the games appear like they're going to matter. It would feel a little hollow, I think, if it got to November, December, January, and like the Capitals are in last place and they're just feeding them for one-timers trying to get this goal record. You know what I mean? Like playing on a competitive team is probably going to keep him energized and engaged too in a different way. I tip my cap to the way things have started in Washington. They had a bunch of home games if you look at the first month of the season, but they've had a great record there and they've taken care of business so far, and they put themselves in position to think about the playoff chase again. And, Ovechkin's doing his part to scoring every night. And, I think we're at the point for me. I mean, you never know any longevity record. And when you're dealing with an athlete as old as he is, like obviously injuries or something could come in and at any moment just derail things. But it does still sort of feel like to me a matter of when, not if he breaks the record. But if he can do it in a year at age 39, where he, it requires him, I think, to score 41 or 42 goals this year to break the record. I mean, the guy's strung together a bunch of impressive achievements, but that's pretty darn impressive. I mean, just not a lot of players at that age are still filling the net. Like it's not like he broke the record if that's what happens with a bunch of 12 goal seasons and he just hung on forever. I mean, really encouraging stuff for him trying to chase that down.
For sure. I'm curious. I'll be curious to see as he gets closer and closer to that mark, how much more attention grows. Obviously, this is a story we're going to be following and the rest of the NHL world is following, but we're still in the early days. Once it gets to like, okay, he's within 20. Okay, he's within 15, 10, 5. Like, I'll obviously be very intrigued at like what the media coverage looks like and how players get excited. Already I have a sense that players around the league are very excited about the chase itself. It's going to be like, I'm just curious how the coverage is like. Yes. It's
a record. I mean, honestly, it's a record that at some points you would have said was never going to be broken. I mean, now, as I say, I feel like he's close enough and it just feels somewhat inevitable. But I mean, I remember I was a really young kid, but when Gretzky first broke like the Gordie Howe record for most points, like every game, Gordie Howe was flying to every Gretzky game so that he could be there, if and when he did it. Like, you'll have reporters obviously following every game, national reporters. Like it will be an event. And let's face it, there's going to be a lot of discussion, as there should be, about Ovechkin and the his attachment to Putin. Should we be celebrating this? I mean, there's going to be those questions. Like, that's going to be all part of it.
We've talked about it on the show.
Right. But I'm just going to say, I'm just saying, that will be also part of the discourse and the discussion. And that talk will get more loud and more pronounced, as it should be. I mean, again, I don't think it's an unfair discussion to have. It's just that all of the attention will go on. And that's why I think it'll be really interesting if he's got a chance to do it in the final days of the season, even. If he finishes 3 goals short, it won't be quite the same next October, for example. It'll still be get lots of attention. Don't get me wrong, but it's more if what started here goes on and it gets to March, you're going to have a traveling roadshow at every game, just because he's the sort of player, obviously, that can score 3 in a night. You're not going to be able to predict when it happens, and there'll be a certain amount of, who knows, the pressure is going to mount on him too. It's going to get a little more difficult to break, I think, with all that attention as well.
For sure. I want to go to another team in the Metro, the New York Islanders.
The other thing too, I'll mention.
Oh, you go ahead. Last
point. No, I just thought of it after I finished, but this is one of the few things that will get hockey wider attention too. Like it's such an easy to understand, in a sense, like most goals, like you don't have to know the ins and outs of hockey. You know that if the puck goes in the net, it's a goal. Like, I just think it will get different level of coverage from the ESPNs and places. I think it will give hockey more of a focus than it gets for virtually any other story I could imagine this year.
And Alexander Ovechkin is still a relatively recognizable name for some casuals, I guess. Maybe obviously not to the level of Wayne Gretzky, but I mean, Wayne Gretzky being involved in this, of course, that will rope people in for sure.
Right. And I bet Gretzky, because he'll remember how was at all his things. Mark this early. I've never asked him anything, but I bet he'll be going to all those games too, as much as his schedule allows. And he'll want to do for Alex what Gordie did for him, which was, very graciously pass basically the baton over.
And I'm sure with his responsibilities at TNT, I mean, that could be made easy as well. Imagine if you're TNT and you're broadcasting a potential game where Ovechkin could break the record. That's another thing too. Like, how does the broadcasting part of this with TNT and ESPN, how do they change their broadcasting schedule? How much of that?
Well, maybe they're turning regional games into national games. Like, I don't know how 100%. That goes into that, but when it happens, the game itself will stop. There might even be a ceremony on the ice. Anyway, I
would think so. Yeah.
My point is, it's like, you're not going to see this every year. Like, this will be something that's, because of the significance of the record, and it's a monumental achievement that he's trying to chase down. And again, still a ways off, but there's footsteps already.
100%. I'm glad we were able to add that those extra points on that discussion. Let's get to the Islanders. Walking wounded, it feels like. It's just a lot of guys out for them. Anthony Duclair is already out long term. Matthew Barzal out for the next couple of weeks. He's on LTIR. Adam Pelech taking a puck to the mouth against the Buffalo Sabres. He's out too. Mike Riley, Alexander Romanov also out as well. With that LTIR being used, the Islanders, I mean, $9.15 million above the cap floor. I'm very curious to know what they might do with the situation that they're in, Siege.
Well, I mean, I think they'd like to get a defenseman. We saw Utah make a deal for Ole Mata in the last week. The Leafs sent Liljegren to San Jose. I mean, there's certainly, early this year, it feels like there's been a little bit more trade discussion, more trade traction. I don't know why that is than some prior years. I mean, sometimes you don't see a deal made until, mid-November or something like that. But it just seems like it could just be teams have a bit more cap space. We've seen the cap jump a couple times now in consecutive summers. Maybe it's some star-crossed situations like you have in Colorado. I mean, even the Utah losing 2 of their top 3 for significant amounts of time, helps necessitate that Mata trade when it came. Now I think the Islanders are in that kind of position where they have to look around and see, if there's maybe some kind of stopgap for their blue line. I don't think you're looking at a blockbuster type of deal, but certainly, depth is something that a team like that could use when their depth is being tested. And this is a big year on Long Island. I mean, Brock Nelson hasn't got a ton of attention just yet, but he's a pending UFA. I mean, I've already started mining ideas for the trade board. And I can tell you some of the conversations I've had that there's a few people that work for teams that said, like, if, and at this point it's a huge if, but if the Islanders are not in, playoff contention come March 7th, I think Brock Nelson will be probably number 1 or number 2 on the trade board. I don't want to spoil the next few months for everyone. But obviously the Islanders aren't going to just punt on their season with all these injuries. So I think that we're in the phase where there's some pressure on the front office and Lou Lamoriello, their GM, to try to do what he can to help the team get through this stretch of injuries. And so, wouldn't surprise me to see them make some kind of depth move here to try to patch things together until the Pelicans can get back. And the Islanders are a team that wins when they're at their best on their team games. So I think they are a team that can muscle through this, but, should the season go in the wrong direction, we'll quickly pivot to talking about them potentially trading at least one compelling player out the door, which I certainly think is at least a possibility for later in the year.
For sure. And Brock Nelson would help a lot of teams for their playoff chase. Also, I think I said $9.15 million above the cap floor, cap ceiling. You guys knew what I meant. Jeez.
I didn't, I totally missed that. And I listen closely. So
yeah, I know you
it
do.
Escaped
I
me.
just think it just brain farts. It happens. Next thing, any updates on Connor McDavid and Macklin Celebrini? We know they've gone through some injuries the last few weeks.
Yeah, great news on McDavid. I get the sense that his return could be rather quick, even though the team announced a 2 to 3 week expected window with the ankle injury suffered last Monday in Columbus. Basically he's been able to skate already, testing out how his ankle feels. Obviously it's a monitored day by day situation to see if he gets comfortable. But, after some of the initial fears there, would not at all surprise me to see him beat the expected timeline and return to Edmonton's lineup. They managed to win a couple games without him. That also helps. But I think he's raring to go. He's not far off 1,000 points. You talk about milestones. He's got that within his sights for pretty quickly after he gets back to the lineup. So pretty good there. Celebrini's only played just the one game. He's been dealing with a hip issue, and, from what I've been told, I think the Sharks have been very cautious with this one. Just given who he is, we all know what their season's about. It's not that they're not trying to win games, but I think that the bigger picture is certainly in mind. But could see him anywhere a week to 10 days, back in the lineup. And that would be great because he played one game, scored his first NHL goal, and then we haven't heard from him for 3 weeks. So, he's back skating with the team, and, I don't think he's too far off returning either. So 2 number 1 picks, going to be back on the ice where we want to see them shortly here.
Also, Braden Point, we kind of mentioned him in passing earlier. He left his game Sunday against Winnipeg with an injury. I don't know if we have anything more on that.
No, Concern obviously missed time in that cup run with a core issue. Looked like after he actually scored a goal in the game against Winnipeg, and you saw him motioning, sort of looking uncomfortable around the sort of groin area. You hope it's nothing that's been a bigger picture issue from in the past, but don't have a lot of concrete info. But, obviously, pretty big news, given that he's one of the 6 players already named to Canada's Four Nations team. If it ended up being something more significant, that could have some implications there. And the fact that, he scores a goal and leaves, in the first period of the game against Winnipeg, and he's done for the night. We'll just see how things develop, but not a lot of concrete info beyond just the basics on that one.
Okay. Are you ready for questions, Big Money Siege?
Born ready.
By the way, Siege does not screen these questions. He has no idea what's coming. I think now I'm just gonna make sure I reiterate that to everybody, because I love the fact that I get to read these questions and you have no idea what to expect.
0. It's like the NHL standings. A little bit of a mystery to me.
For sure. Let's get to this first one from Damian Smith. What does Claude Giroux's next contract look like, and will it be with the Sens? I can start with this one. I know it's out there. Bruce Garriock has, I think, went on TSN 1200 and says that he expects contract negotiations maybe to start after American Thanksgiving. I'll say this. Claude Giroux getting to play closer to home. He's from Hearst, Ontario. Obviously, I know there's some distance, but still there is that proximity. Just had a newborn, still playing at a high enough level. I know I'd be very surprised if it got to a point where Claude Giroux was playing elsewhere. I'd be very surprised if there wasn't some kind of extension that would come in at some point through this year. If he's still able to play at a high enough level around this core, around this group of young players, and still kind of help with them in some way, I think it's on the Senators to make the deal, to get this deal done. Essentially, I think if there was a confidence meter on that, I would put it like above 85, 90% that he will sign some kind of deal with the Ottawa Senators. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty confident he's staying.
I think it's likely. The only question would be, obviously, he's a player that hasn't won a cup yet in his career. Right. It would be only if he had doubts about the direction of things, and I have no reason to believe he does. I'm just saying that would be one factor to consider. And I think at this stage, Cloutier is probably, when you're talking about what the contract looks like, he's probably in the phase that you saw like Joe Pavelski at the end of his time with Dallas, where he goes year by year, where he's probably signing a 1-year extension. The league does allow for players 35 and over, which Claude is. He's 36, to put bonuses into those kind of contracts. So it's probably going to be a contract maybe a little lighter on the guaranteed money, but with some bonuses. Wherever he signs, and I'm with you. I mean, I would think that Ottawa makes a whole lot of sense for him and his family. But some of that will hinge on how the season goes too. And if he feels the team's in the right spot, and certainly I have no reason to think though that they wouldn't want to keep him. And, hopefully, he's looked actually pretty good to start the year. Hopefully he's got a few more years in him, but I just think you get to this stage, most players are signing year by year because it doesn't lock you in anywhere. There's no salary cap complications for the team. If maybe after one season you decide you're done. And so I would think he's in year by year territory, like we saw with Patrice Bergeron before he finished, Joe Pavelski and some others.
Next one from MJ. Question for CJ. Would you rather get season tickets for the Toronto Blue Jays next year or do one of your daily runs in flip-flops?
I'd rather do a daily run in flip-flops because my stated position on the Blue Jays remains unchanged. I had a buddy, someone actually works in the hockey industry, texting me over the weekend saying that he thinks the Jays are getting Juan Soto. And
oh boy.
And I don't know if he was winding me up or not, but I was like, I'm not even going to get excited about that possibility. I'm not even, I'm Jays agnostic right now, as stated. So, I mean, you could give me the season tickets to the Jays, but I wouldn't be going to any of the games. I would be giving all those tickets away. So I'd rather do a run in flip-flops and wait for a new outlook in the Jays front office before I'm back.
So if Juan Soto, the Jays splurge, they sign Juan Soto in the offseason, what does that, you're not changed? Like, what does that do for you?
It's going to test my...
It's
really going to test
me.
Free
agent.
But honestly, it's still so abstract. I don't have to make that decision yet. But I mean, obviously, if they sign him, I would be pretty excited. It would just be like, how committed am I to my stated, position on the Jays that I'm not going back till they get a new GM.
Nah. Anyway,
let's not waste any time on that. But I'm running in flip flops versus taking the season tickets. That's the answer to the question.
From Sesh, this is an interesting one. The Leafs need power play scoring. It would help to get a winger. Phil the Thrill is available. Phil Kessel, do you take a flyer on the guy? Throw him on the power play and like the third line?
No. I mean, come on. He didn't play in the league last year. I've noticed that he's appears to have joined the World Poker Tour.
Yes, he has.
Which is great. Good for Phil. I mean, but it just seems like he's moved on. The league's moved on. He did have that PTO with Vancouver last season, didn't turn into a contract. Unfortunately, time has come and gone for Phil. And just, I don't think that makes sense for any team, let alone a team like the Leafs who already have too many players, as we started the show talking about. So, no, I wouldn't even waste a thought on that one. I think Phil's on other things.
Sci-Fi Sean, longtime listener, first-time CJ show writer. Slap shots rock and aren't in the NHL enough anymore. Is there any appetite to move the blue lines back to their previous position so we get dudes blasting from the point again?
I don't think so, because the main reason for moving them in was to create more havoc in the ozone. And I think that there would be concern about reverting to what was, that you get some of the same problems. At the end of the day, part of, and I'm not saying blame analytics, But it's sort of like in the NBA, how certain types of shots have basically gone out of vogue because there's a way to quantify what those shots are worth. We see obviously a lot more 3-pointers, as an example, being attempted in NBA games than we ever did going back 20 years because of the expected value, basically what the numbers allow them teams to measure. It's the same thing with slap shots well, I'm with you that there's some players, I think of like Shea Weber in his prime, like ripping them literally through the mesh of the net. Al McInnes, for those of a certain vintage, was a pretty intimidating shooter. Those shots just, by the numbers aren't as dangerous. They're not as likely to produce a goal as, say, a pass that goes across what they call the Royal Road, a side to side pass, for example. And so I can appreciate a slap shot. I still think that there's a place for one in certain circumstances, but most teams are basically instructing their players not to take them or trying to dissuade them against that. And so I think kids, you probably got a generation. This is just me guessing. There's no way for me to test this. You probably got a generation growing up barely even practicing that compared to what it used to be. And so, at least for the time being, I think it's going the other way. I think you're going to see fewer and fewer slap shots as time goes along.
From Mike, any real chance that Marc Savard is on the hot seat as Leafs power play coach?
I mean, he's on the hot seat because it can't be comfortable. Like, they're showing him on the broadcast every game. There's a lot of discussion about the fact he is the Leafs power play coach. I wonder how many teams around the league, off the top of your head, people would know who the power play coach is. Like, it's not always discussed. It's not always a major topic of discussion, but it's become one in Toronto. But he's not on the hot seat that I think he could be fired or reassigned. I mean, it's still such early days. I would think at minimum he's getting one season, which is what his predecessor, Guy Boucher, got. He was in that role last year, and when Craig Berube was hired, didn't stay on the coaching staff, and so he was one and done. I would think at minimum Marc Savard gets one full season in that job, but I'm sure he's got a lot of people in his ear right now, and as much as he's responsible for it, there's probably a bit of a collaboration going on behind the scenes trying to get this sorted out because it's that important for the Leafs.
Two more quick ones for you. This one from Jor Turtle. This one might not be as quick. I was surprised that you both weren't aware of the George Peros hates the Leafs conspiracy. It's been going on well before even Jason Spezza's suspension against the Winnipeg Jets. In that vein, what are each of your I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but this sounds plausible conspiracy, sports related or not? This is, I don't know if we need some kind of disclaimer over here. This is not that serious. These things we might discuss.
I'm not a big conspiracy guy. Are
Me
you?
neither, man. I'm not. Like, I don't really subscribe to a lot of conspiracy. I try to just not deal with that type of stuff. But like, I was also just curious if you had.
But I'm even thinking for sports. Like, is there anything like even kind of funny? Like, I can't even think of what one would be.
Like,
I mean, I certainly, for what it's worth, I don't believe the whole George Peros thing. Like, is this someone's idea that he had that fight with Colton Orr back in the day or something? Like, why would he hate the Leafs? Like, I've heard people say that he hates like Nashville because he lives in Nashville, and that he hates.
That he lives there and he doesn't like. Okay,
well, I guess maybe it's the idea is that he watches too many games, or that like. Anyway, I think it's easy.
You go ahead. Sorry,
I just can't believe he. I just refuse to believe that he actually has a conspiracy against any one team, or like has like a predilection to. I think it could be as simple as there's more scrutiny on some of the plays that happen in a Leafs game and stuff like that, like forces decisions. But I don't think it's because George gives a shit, honestly.
I still think it's not, I'm not throwing shade at anybody. I've talked about it before. I just think there's just some giant wheel in their Department of Player Safety office, and whenever they have to deal with something, they just spin the wheel, and whatever comes out, that's what their judgment is. It's not consistent enough. It's not consistent enough with how they dole out judgment, as far as I'm concerned. So why should I think that it's anything but a wheel? And I'm saying this half jest.
That's fair. I mean... So is that your conspiracy? Is that there's actually no process, that like your conspiracy is it's just literally a spin of a wheel?
I think for the purpose of this answer, it might be. I don't have a genuine.
I honestly don't have any conspiracies though. It's not even because I'm
Yeah, you don't even
But you know
have
what I mean? Like,
one in,
it's not
real
like I'm
life.
being shy to like share something. Like my brain doesn't work that way.
So you're not one of those people who think we live among like lizard people or something like that?
I mean, maybe. No, I don't think so. No. Like, I guess I thought you were going to say like I'm at least open-minded enough to think that there could be like extraterrestrial life among us.
I don't think it's a conspiracy theory at all. I'm definitely open to that possibility.
But my point is like, but I don't have a conspiracy. I don't have like, this exists and the government's all know about it and they don't share it. Like, I mean, I don't know.
Keep your third eye open and all that. Anyway.
Yes. Sorry, we didn't really do a good job of that question, but
the CJ show, 100% conspiracy theory free. Anyway, last one from Maureen. Any word on a Mikko Rantanen extension? Do you see him re-signing with Colorado Avalanche?
I mean, that's what the team wants to have happen, but they have not been close to this point on that. I think, one of the complications potentially is, we're seeing what players get paid go up. The cap has gone up, right? Leon Draisaitl has reestablished a new spot for the most well-paid player at $14 million. Can you pay Mikko Rantanen as much or more than Nathan McKinnon? The argument from his agent would be, it's not that we're even saying he's better than McKinnon. It's that if you go by the percentage of the cap, there's maybe an argument to pay him 12.8 or 13 or what have you. And obviously at this point, I don't think Colorado has been there yet. And so, I think that there's still lots of time to get it done. I think certainly I know the Avalanche would like to get it done, but they aren't too close. And how they sort of reconcile, giving him a raise and where that lands, I think is kind of the main sticking point, if you want to call it that. But when you look at Rantanen, I think he's had consecutive 100+ point seasons. Probably one of the players that's a little underrated, frankly. I mean, he's recognized as a star, but he's a superstar. And if he hits the market, it's going to be fascinating. But, we're still a fair ways off that, almost 8 months till free agency. So whether it's Rantanen or Shesterkin or Marner or any of the other potential big UFAs, there's still a lot of time for their teams to get something done there.
Well done, as always, Big Money Siege, with the Monday edition of the CJ Show, tackling the questions, providing us with some insights, players to look out for potentially ahead of the deadline if things don't shake a particular team's way. And then, of course, with Leafs Corner at the top of our show. Well done, man. I don't know how you do it.
Well, I couldn't do it without you. That's the truth.
Checks in the mail. We've done almost 300 of these episodes. I'm glad we're still keeping this going. We'll be back later this week with a brand new episode of the show. Subscribe to the podcast and peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.